Bam.
All right, folks, this is Not Gaetti, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
I love it. This is a lot of fun. We get to do a lot of fun things on here, and I get to talk to really incredible people. You know, it spans the globe. I mean, I've talked to Stuart Copeland from the Police, and now I'm talking to Not Gaetti. And look, I love baseball. I've loved baseball since the 70s. And there are so many people that get to write and think and talk and study professionally the game. And you're one of those people that has taken what used to be a very siloed thing, and you said, hey, I've got my own silo, and you've done really well for yourself on X. So congratulations to you. Thanks for what you do. And I've always loved the people that shine a light on players that need the light shined on them. And you spend a lot of time doing that. So thanks for what you do. Appreciate you coming on the show. And gosh, it's great to be able to chat with you.
Yeah, likewise. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. You're one of these people that I interact with pretty regularly on the platform. And, I always enjoy sort of the thoughtful commentary and, there's a handful of folks that I feel like are really on the same page in terms of there are, a couple hundred players in Cooperstown, but there's a whole lot more that really deserve to be talked about and really deserve to kind of come up in conversation more than they do, which of course is the origin of the whole NEPTA thing. Not enough people talk about.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I will do a NEPTA post about a Hall of Famer because I do think some people can be in the Hall of Fame and still be underrated. But for the most part, there's just a ton of guys out there that had really wonderful careers, created really great memories. And, it's when I post about these guys, it kind of goes in a number of directions that are all really meaningful in their own ways. Some people will comment with specific memories that they have going to a game, seeing a player, remembering a specific play, the way it turned the tide of the game. Others will remember, meeting a player, getting an autograph when they were a kid, made a huge impact on them. They'll remember a guy who maybe was a favorite player of a parent or relative. They'll reevaluate Cooperstown cases of guys that maybe were mistreated throughout the voting process. And so there's really a lot of different directions that these posts go in. And driving that conversation has been really one of the most satisfying parts about doing the NEPTA series.
Yeah, I love it. It is a lot of fun. I love to talk about these players that have reputation that, look, maybe it's partially earned. I like to write about Bill Buckner anytime I get a chance to, because when you go out and you run the numbers, the guy had tremendous range at first base, had, by several measures, the best or the second best arm at first base. And it's not close. Like, he was a dominator with his arm. But people think about Buckner and think about an error he made late in his career when, if he had played in modern times, they probably would have been able to return some of his range. But he didn't. He played the time that he played. And McNamara's like, yeah, go out there, dude, and go grab that ring. You've played for a long time. And it just didn't work out. And these things happen. Half an inch sometimes makes a big difference in someone's life. And I like to be able to talk about Buckner and what a freak he was in his career.
Yeah, and he was the subject of one of my longer articles, one of my early Not Gaetti at Large columns that I published on X. And in typical Not Gaetti fashion, I think it was titled "You People Are Mishandling Bill Buckner's Legacy." And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. You hit it right on the head with misremembering his entire career by viewing it exclusively through the lens of the worst play of his life on the biggest stage in front of the most people. And that's not how any artist or craftsman or athlete ever wants to be remembered for their worst moment. It happens from time to time, of course, but you have to remember, baseball is inherently a game of failure. Even the greatest players don't get the optimal outcome most of the time. And so when you play for 20 bad moments, but he's another guy that really also gets crushed by WAR and analytics because he didn't draw a lot of walks, and he also didn't strike out a lot, which means he put a ton of balls in play, right? The three
Yeah.
true outcomes: walk, strikeout, homer. He was very low in all three TTO outcomes.
Yeah.
But he had over 10,000 plate appearances. So if you go to bat over 10,000 times and you don't have a lot of homers, walks, and strikeouts, what it means is you're going to hit into a ton of outs. And modern analytics really favors out avoidance more than, obtaining hits specifically. Because, in theory, a team that's on fire, a lineup that's really going, could get unlimited hits in a game, but you only have 27 outs no matter what. So
Yeah.
avoiding outs has really become paramount, and guys didn't really think that way. I think of Buckner and Steve Garvey as being cut from the same cloth in terms of the era that they played in. Their job was to go up and really try to put the ball in play and hit line drives and bring guys home. So Buckner had 100 RBI seasons, even though he wasn't a big power guy, because he could put the bat on anything. He never struck out 40 times in a season. He never, in 22 years, struck out 3 times in a game. Even the great Tony Gwynn had a 3 strikeout game, but Bill Buckner never did. That's the kind of hitter he was. But because he was low power and high hitting into outs, if you look at his OPS plus, it's very modest. If you look at his WAR, it's very modest. And some people will say that those are per se disqualifying in terms of getting into the Hall of Fame. And also he's saddled with this moment in the 86 World Series that is unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. But even given all of those things, I think a lot of people lose sight of what he did achieve with getting over 2,700 hits, nearly 500 doubles, more doubles than strikeouts in his career. You don't see that very often. And so, I do think, I'm not saying he needs a plaque in Cooperstown, but I do think people need to sort of take another look at his career, at his legacy, realize that there was the bulk of his career happened before that play. He was a batting title winner. He had some very good years, and he's sort of a great example of NEPTA material. Like, not enough people talk about the great things that he achieved because they're too distracted by A, the bad moment, and B, viewing a career from decades ago through the modern lens.
Yeah. You were talking about this earlier, and I wanted to bring this example of this player up. Mike Scioscia is one of those guys, and if you remember back when he played, he batted second in the lineup a lot. Not because he was a great hitter, but he didn't strike out very much. He's a catcher. He's slow, but you have Steve Sachs usually batting in front of him, and Steve Sachs would steal a bag. So you got a guy that you're not worried about striking out. If you put a hit and run on, you got the right combination of things. And so, sure, he's not one of these 3 true outcome guys. But if you wanted to do something, you could quickly have a runner at third base. Even if you got an out of it, you had a left-handed guy who could bop the ball through the hole. Maybe you bought Scioscia a couple extra hits. I think Mike Scioscia's on-base percentage for his career is .344. This is a slow catcher,
Right.
But he never struck out more than maybe 50 times in a normal year. Maybe he's got a bad year out there, a flyer of a bad something, but this is a very talented guy. You never think about his ability to do that and what that means for a guy like Tommy Lasorda. He's like, hey, I'm going to give you a problem of Steve Sachs on second or third base with 1 out, or maybe no outs, but and now you have to deal with my 3, 4, 5 hitters, and that's a real thing that is a little bit lost to the folks that are a little bit focused on how important the lineup structure is. And so we do lose these guys like Buckner and Scioscia and all these other different guys that played a certain role in the lineup, because you don't have to be perfect at getting this one job done. You don't have to smash a home run. It's great if Neil Walker plays second base and crushes home runs, 22 times a year. But also there's another thing you can do with that spot in the lineup. And I think you and I both value what a player might bring without having to just strike out 135 times. And you're like, hey, why not just put the ball in play? and let that player in front of you scooch over a base or two.
For sure. And Sosha is an interesting example. It turns out he never struck out more than 32 times in a year.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Not enough people talk about that.
No. NEPTA Mike Sosha's low strikeout rate. But, lineup construction has changed considerably since then.
Right.
And that's gone sort of hand in hand with this notion of like homogenization of what makes a good hitter. Sosha would have batted second specifically because of his bat handling skills. Being able to avoid the strikeout means you can put a hit and run on. And, with somebody, a base stealer like Sachs ahead of him, you're less worried about the double play because more often than not, Sachs can put himself in scoring position. And so if you have a guy that only strikes out 30 times every 400 plate appearances, and right field is to his pull side because he hit left-handed. So you don't even have to, the same way with a right-hander, you really have to focus on driving it through the 3-4 hole the other way if you want to send somebody to third base. This is to his pull side. So, I mean, you would never see this again today. A guy with a 700 OPS and no speed hitting second. Modern takes on lineup construction. You put your best hitter second. You see Mike Trout has batted second most of his career. Aaron Judge, the year he hit 62 home runs, he mostly batted second for the Yankees. The only reason he bats third this year is because they've got Juan Soto hitting second. Because having the guy with the highest OBP of any active player in front of your guy with 60 homer power is an absolute no-brainer. But yeah, you used to see weaker hitters batting second a lot more than you do now, but it was always a guy that had some kind of special skill that made him a tough out. You never put an easy out second. They were always a tough out, even if they were not a super productive hitter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to talk about another aspect of the NEPTA thing is when you have a player, we'll use Bill Buckner again because we've already talked about him. We often hold injuries against players, probably more often than not. I'm not sure if it's a good rule of thumb, but that's my rule of thumb. But there's certain players where like, oh, he got hurt, so we don't mind it so much. Don Mattingly gets hurt, and we kind of unfairly hold that against him. Kirby Puckett has largely the same numbers for a career. Don't hold it against him. He gets to go to the Hall of Fame. These things don't always balance out. Buckner just gets destroyed in his legs. He can't even bend his ankles at all. And we hold that against him. And so we have these things where if a player is in a certain situation, if you change their team, if Buckner's on a better team throughout the 70s instead of the Cubs, hey, he bats maybe 200 more times in over the course of the 70s. And all of a sudden, there's another, 35 hits, and he's staring at 3,000. So you have these scenarios where if a player is just simply in a better situation because they get traded, that's him and Garvey. Garvey stays. What if Garvey leaves and Garvey goes to just a bad team? You don't know. He doesn't get the shine that he gets from playing on the Dodgers and going to World Series, winning a World Series title. These situations, we often lose sight of the era and then just dumb luck of being on a good or a bad team.
Yeah, I think people consider those things differently. I'm a big proponent of mostly considering reality as it was. I mean, take the career of Derek Jeter, who played from 95 to 14. He played 20 years for the Yankees, during which time they never had a losing season. They had a run of 6 pennants in 8 years. They had a run of 4 World Series in 5 years. And he was the everyday shortstop for 2 decades for the best team in baseball.
Right.
It drives me crazy when people say, oh, if he played for Milwaukee, you'd never would have heard of the guy. First of all, I don't think that's remotely true. But second of all, yeah, maybe another player would have had a better career than they did if it had been them in New York instead of wherever they were playing. But even if that's so, that's not what happened. Okay, if Barry Larkin never gets hurt and plays his whole career in New York instead of Cincinnati, he's still a Hall of Famer, but he's maybe like a unanimous Hall of Famer, right?
Right. Right.
But that's not what happened. Barry Larkin is a
Right.
Hall of Famer because he was great, but he played his whole career in Cincinnati and he had trouble staying healthy. He's not less of a player, but I have always said that greatness really requires opportunity.
Mm.
I think part of what makes Derek Jeter great is that he had the opportunity to be great and rose to the occasion. He was in the right place at the right time, and he has the numbers to show for it. I mean, he's got the 6th most hits all time. He's a winner. He did a lot of things great. Just a dangerous hitter, a tough out his whole career. And that's the reality as it was. Other guys have, perhaps not played up to the opportunity because they didn't receive an opportunity that was at that level. People talk about Harold Baines a lot. It frustrates me to no end that he's been sort of vilified as a weak Hall of Fame candidate. People, they have the Baines meter showing how 38.8 WAR, or whatever he has, is setting the bar way too low. People complain about it like he put himself in the Hall of Fame, right? I don't agree with him drawing so much ire for this, but he's a case where he played through 2 separate work stoppages in 81 and in 94, 95. And so this is no fault of his. And in the case of injuries, it's I wouldn't say injuries are the player's fault either, but it is ultimately a failing of one's own body, right? It's you don't blame them for it, but Cal Ripken was indestructible. Barry Larkin was not indestructible. So Baines, we're not talking about injuries. We're talking about work stoppages out of his hands, not a failing of his body, not a failing of him as a player, but he missed, probably between a half to a full season's worth of games as a result of this. Had he played those games, had he played even most of those games, he finishes his career with over 3,000 hits, 500 doubles, 400 home runs, 1,700 RBIs. These big, monumental counting stat milestones, nobody would bat an eye. They'd be like, well, that's a Hall of Fame hitter. If you have 3,000 hits, 1,700 ribbies, you have a plaque in Cooperstown, period. He's really not far below any of those thresholds. He's just under 3,000 hits, just under 500 doubles, just under 300 homers. And he's still in the 1650s, I think, for RBI. The guy was a problem for years. But he's an example where I think he was deprived through no fault of his own, not even through injury, of the ability to reach numbers that would have everybody unanimously celebrating his induction instead of saying, oh, he shouldn't be there.
I want to go back to Derek because he's one of the guys that looks like they call him overrated. And I think you and I agree on this. There's something to be said for durability and longevity. Derek plays, I think the number is, I'm on memory right now, but I think the number is 90% of the possible shortstop games for the Yankees during his career. Nobody else does that over 20 years. I mean, he is the Iron Man of that position. He does better than Vizquel at that position. He does better than Ripken. Now you have to put Ripken in a 20-year hole because that is the standard that Derek sets. He's like, here's 20 years. You're going to have to do better than me at that. Ripken can't do that because he plays third. So there is some context there, but that is the reality. So 9 out of 10 games, there's Derek standing there, and that's valuable. Hey, I'm going to sign a guy for 20 years. You're the owner, right? And he's going to play 90% of the games. He's going to hit 310 for his career, number 6 all-time in hits, a fuckload of doubles. He's going to be absolutely incredible. He's going to be better in the playoffs. You're going to sign that guy every single fucking time for 20 years.
Time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Every single time. And so
you pay any price.
Any price. He's going to play in New York City with all the pressure and he's not going to cause scandals. Oh, yeah. Can we tell the kid, yes, sign him right now. And so when you think about it in that way, I'm not saying that short careers with big peaks aren't valuable. I'm not saying there are players that had better seasons, but when you look at that availability, that durability, that longevity, is he the greatest defensive player? No, but he's not that far back from Ozzie Smith when you look at the greats, all of the greats at playing shortstop, all the way at the right side of the bell curve, right? He's over there on the defensive side. I mean, he's number 10 all time in assists. You don't suck if you've got the 10th most assists. Yes, he plays a lot of games there, but he plays a lot of games there because he doesn't suck. And so these are the things that people get, I don't know why, but they get wrapped up about this. And I don't know if it's emotional. I don't know if they're partly right. I always go back and I look and I'm like, what am I missing about these? And I'm not a Derek Jeter guy. I'm not a New York guy. I just look and I go, man, this guy is incredible. Every time I look and I'm like, I'm blown away by how good and how steady and how long he's good and steady. And it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and a 377 OBP for 20 years, and the guy also stole over 350 bases. Like, he could hit, he could run, he did a lot of things well. I think it's inherent in human nature that when you have a guy on that level, people look for something to hate, something to complain about, something to say, oh, you know what, he's not all that, maybe we can bring him down. And defensive analytics have been that for Derek Jeter. If you look at defensive runs saved, he is actually in last place all time among everyone to ever set foot on a Major League Baseball field. He's 23,000 whatever out of 23,000 whatever. That mostly is a knock on his range. And for sure, I watched a lot of Yankee games, and I can't tell you how many dozens of times a week you hear John Sterling, and it's past a diving Jeter into center field, right?
Yeah.
So was he the rangiest? No, he didn't play like Ozzie. He didn't play like Belanger. He didn't play like some of these guys who could get to anything. Vizquel, Ray Ordonez, right? There's a different breed of glove first shortstop. But the thing about Jeter is that the routine stuff, the stuff that was within his range, he executed the play so consistently every single time. And people harp on his range. They forget that his arm was ridiculous. He was throwing guys out from shallow left field. He was very accurate, very strong arm. And if you hit it to him, you had so much confidence that he was going to make the play. But the biggest piece is that he was such an overwhelmingly superior hitter that it's still worth it. If you can get that kind of offensive production out of your shortstop position when other teams in the league are running out Ray Ordonez and Ray Sanchez and guys like this, I mean, you'll take the trade-off on range 8 days a week. 8 days a week.
This is an important thing. And, you know, look, I'm a big Beltray guy because I see the numbers and I'm just gobsmacked. And I'm writing something that I haven't finished it yet, but I'm always looking at what greatness is. And when we measure greatness against greats, you know, the bar just gets so high. Everything seems to matter. And so when we look at him and Mike Schmidt, and you've seen me write this before, but one of my favorite things is if you put their age at the same time when they start, when Mike Schmidt is prepping for his first semester of college finals, right? So it's December. He's getting ready to go on Christmas break. That's when Beltray debuts as the starting third baseman for the Dodgers. And it's ridiculous because Mike doesn't go to the majors, doesn't even crack and become good. And when he becomes good, look, he's great. And I understand why people love Mike. He's incredible. And in his era, he's so far above everybody else. And it's almost like, are there any other good third baseman from his era at all? And you wondered, and Buddy Bell's there, but he is spectacular. But then you run other numbers. And if you go like doubles and home runs, triples per at bat, you know, who's higher? Yeah, Mike Schmidt's higher. It's like 9.2 per at bat. And Adrian's like 10.8, or maybe it's 9.8 and 10.8. It's nothing over the course of a long career. Beltray has a longer career. And so these things all of a sudden, like the bar is like, can you tell which one's higher? I sure as heck can't. I was surprised to see that. You thought Mike he has this pretty big advantage in home runs, but he doesn't have it on doubles. He doesn't have it on longevity. And so you want there to be this narrative of, oh, Mike's the best. And then you add in defense and it's just not even close. And so it's like, and Mike's a fantastic Gold Glove caliber third baseman. But if we're going to measure greats against greats, it matters that Adrian is just the second best in terms of defense. He got to everything. He made plays that nobody else could make. And so we have these conversations. It breaks people's brains because they've been told for 25, 30 years that Mike is the greatest of all time, or Brett is. Brett plays, I think it's 1,200 games at third, maybe it's 1,500 games at third base. Adrian plays another almost 1,000. The gap is enormous, like 800 game gap. You can't be better at third base than someone who plays 800 games at the elite level. You know, maybe Schmidt can. He's got like 20. There's a bunch of guys at 2,200 games in that range. And then there's Beltre at 27, and then Robinson at 28. These gaps, they matter when you're trying to measure greats against greats, because you just can't bleed 100 games and be like, I'm better than that guy for very long.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's still an argument to be made that Schmidt might be the best all-around third baseman when you factor everything in, because the era that he played in, his offense was just so prodigious and so dominant. I mean, I'm trying to think how many he won like 7 home run titles.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, he led the league in OPS like 5 times. Because the thing he did that Beltre didn't do was he also drew a ton of walks.
Yep.
And so he was just an all-around threat. And he played his whole career for the Phillies, so he spent a lot of time playing on these bad turf fields of the day. I believe Schmidt has the second most games played on turf in MLB history after only Pete Rose.
Yeah.
Because Pete played for Cincinnati, Philly, Montreal, all on turf.
Yeah.
So Schmidt would have only played for the Phillies, but still, you know, you're in the same division as Montreal. You're playing on some of these tough surfaces at one of the, you know, more demanding infield positions. And so, he had like knee problems from time to time. Imagine a situation where Schmidt plays his whole career on natural grass and he probably hits 600 home runs and maybe wins like 15 Gold Gloves. It's just ridiculous. But Beltre, I'm a huge Beltre guy. He hit like 600 and some doubles, very close to 500 homers, drove in over 1,700, and also just a tremendous defender. Like you said, you see him make plays that other guys of his era don't make. Like maybe Brooks Robinson makes it, but guys playing when Beltre was playing probably don't make a lot of those plays. And I'm also big on sort of intangibles and character and Hall of Fun, right? I think Beltre is first ballot Hall of Fun. And, I give him a lot of credit for that too, just being a really joyful player to watch.
Yeah. It's, and I don't want to just talk about the players I want to talk about, but these are the fun conversations. And again, let me scope back and look at all 23,000 players. When you look at that, there is no difference between Buddy Bell and Ozzie Smith. These guys are all on that flat side of the bell curve where all the greats are. And you're like, Buddy Bell, but I'm telling you, when you scope back and there's 23,000 players and the bell curve has players that have negative WAR, because that's where most everybody resides, you realize that we're arguing over people that are just incredible players and incredible athletes. And so whether it's Ken Keltner or guys who don't make it in that have 45 WAR, come on, there's no difference. I mean, Aramis Ramirez, I think, should be a Hall of Famer. If we're going to look and we're going to measure and we're going to scope back and looking back, come on, what's the difference here? You know, we're really not talking anything, and people don't ever think about it. I've written about Aramis Ramirez a couple of times, but we dismiss these guys way too quick, and we go back to talking about King Griffey Jr. It's fun to talk about King Griffey Jr., but there are so many players that deserve such a longer look, and the way the system works, a lot of players get processed one time. And I don't want to talk just about the players I want to talk about, but we looked at this past year, we had Utley is a darling of the folks that love high peaks and jaws, and there's nothing wrong with jaws, great way to measure players. But then Matt Holliday is virtually the same career, the same kind of numbers. I mean, almost identical, and he gets nothing, no support at all. And I'm like, how are these two that much different? I mean, there's no way that Utley's defense is so much greater that it covers for Holiday's better offensive numbers. And if it is, I don't see how one can have, I don't know, whatever, 20% Hall of Fame support and then essentially one and done on the ballot. So that's always interesting to me when you look at these things and people are so passionate about why Holiday sucks, but Utley is great. And I'm like looking at him and I'm like, Okay, but where is it at? Show me where it is. In base running, is it in base running? Is that the difference between these two guys? I don't buy that, man.
Right. And so that's actually an interesting comp, Holiday and Utley. You know, it would not shock me. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it would not shock me if Utley had superior base running metrics. But I think bigger picture, the difference is Holiday won a batting title, right? And people will say, but he was on the Rockies. You know, Coors has a disproportionate number of batting title winners, even though they have so few Hall of Famers, right? You have guys like Matt Holliday, Justin Morneau, Michael Kadire, who show up in the Rockies and suddenly win a batting title. So he gets penalized for the park factors. And then the bigger thing is Utley is giving you these numbers at second base, while Holliday is giving you these numbers at the position of Barry Bonds. So
Yeah.
it's can you find a left fielder that hits like Matt Holliday more easily than you can find a second baseman that hits like Chase Utley? Yes, unquestionably, yes. And so that gets baked into the formula. And so the problem is that a lot of people who want to take WAR to the bank and view it as gospel don't really think about these considerations in terms of like how the formula gets there. They're more concerned with whether the math is correct than whether it's true or meaningful or helpful or matters. And so the player is more important than the math. And maybe the justification is fine, is something that you should be okay with, but at least think about it before just looking at a number and saying, well, this number says this, therefore it's disqualifying and he can't be a Hall of Famer.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's always another problem in that if you stick too hard, look, and I love modern stuff. I'm a Bill James guy going back decades, but there's always another guy that you can slide in there. So if you slide in Soriano, not only a positional peer sometimes, but it's also an era peer. I mean, I think there's probably a couple of years difference, but not much. And Soriano probably debuts younger and is out earlier, but these guys have a lot of overlap. And all of a sudden you realize, man, oh man, Soriano and Utley, you know, if we're going to fall in love with Utley, we have Soriano. And it gets hard because I don't think Soriano had very much Hall of Fame support either. So, you know, how do we get so precious with one, you know, and how much of that is buzz and how much of that, I'm not against Utley. I'm always for every player. I always want these guys to get, if anybody's ever heard me say this, I want these guys to get 10 years in the league to max out their retirement. I'm a big June Calhoun fan. I want Willie's from my hometown, and I want him to get as much retirement money as he can. I want him to have great years. I want him to get traded to a team that's contending so he can get a ring. I'm all for every player. So I'm not against Utley at all. But when I think about these things, I'm like, how much of this is passion and getting sold by somebody's writing? And how much of this is actual? Is there a difference enough between Soriano, Holiday, whoever the next player? There's another great comp in there that fits between Utley, Holiday, and Soriano. There's another great one. And just like these are four players that are all in a big circle together, and they're all so similar because there's been 23,000 players, and there's a lot of careers that are very, very comparable.
And like you said, all of these guys are at the far right of the bell curve, ultimately.
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
They had really long, really decorated careers. And so you have to split hairs and decide, you know, how big a Hall guy are you? You had brought up Buddy Bell before, who was a 6-time Gold Glover, hit over 200 homers.
Terrible.
You know, he was a one and done on the Hall of Fame ballot. He got 1.7% of the vote, fell off the ballot, and this is a guy with over 66 WAR.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah.
Soriano, you brought up. He was a recent NEPTA subject, actually.
Was he? Okay.
Yeah, he hit over 400 homers. He had a 40-40 season. Just incredible stuff. He almost had a second 40-40 season with the Yankees. He missed by 1 homer. So he would have been the first player in history to have 2 40-40 seasons. Just unthinkable. The guy was so dynamic, so exciting to watch. I think if he had the glove to stick as a second baseman, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. But like we talked about with Holiday and Utley, you get moved to a position that expects more offense, but then you don't hit like Barry Bonds.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're getting penalized by the formula.
Yeah. Yeah. And the formula does not, like the OPS thing, right? And you go to a crowded, if you play in the late 90s, early 2000s, OPS, forget about it. It was just so crazy. And you can get OPS into oblivion because there's people getting 1,200 OPSs and not leading the league. It's crazy.
Which is where OPS plus comes in, right? It adjusts for the specific year so that the league average hitter is always 100. And so OPS plus and ERA plus is the same thing for pitchers. That's one that, again, I don't think you put all your stock in it because as a rate stat doesn't fully tell you the volume of contribution. Like if you're a full-time player, if you play 150 plus games and your OPS plus is pretty good, you can have a lot of confidence in that.
Yeah.
But, it's really easy to eyeball. If somebody's got 110, they're 10% better than a league average hitter. And so just in terms of like finding what ballpark, pardon the pun, a player was in a particular year, it's helpful to look at. Now, besides just normalizing the stats so that average is 100, it does also take park adjustments into account, which is why if you look at Dante Bichette in the 90s, he's putting up these ridiculous numbers, but because of the era and because of Coors, he gets like a 102 OPS plus. Guys hitting like 300 with 30 something bombs and 120 ribbies, and you're 2% better than a league average hitter. You put those numbers up today, you might win the MVP. So it's very interesting. My whole thing is I'm not inherently anti any of this stuff. I think more information is great. I think informed decision making is great. I think evaluating players, through different lenses is great because ultimately that's what I ask people to do in my writing all the time is view players through a different lens, think about them in a way that perhaps they haven't thought about them in the past. And so I look at the stuff. I look at WAR, I look at OPS plus, I look at batting runs and fielding runs, which are some of WAR's constituent inputs. I have found some really interesting things in that regard in terms of a player's well-roundedness. Guys that rate well in both batting runs and fielding runs, they're surprisingly hard to find. So sometimes, if I come across an interesting one like that, I'll put it into my NEPTA thing. We recently had Jesse Barfield, who was one of just 8 players ever, I think, with over 100 batting runs and 160 fielding runs. And it's like Barry Bonds, Willie Mays, all these guys that either are in the Hall of Fame or have Hall of Fame type numbers. And Jesse Barfield, he's right there hanging with them. 23,000 guys ever played the game, and he's one of 8 to reach these marks. I think it was 100 batting runs, 160 fielding runs, and an 800 career OPS. And so
it's crazy.
Yeah, like people might remember that he led the league in homers once. People probably remember his incredible arm in right field, but I don't think people remember just the well-roundedness of his game and the fact that he stacks up against some of the very best players of all time in that regard.
One of the cool things about following you and participating in posts with you is you wrote that, and I loved watching the Toronto teams back then, and I used to play a lot of rotisserie back in the old rotisserie days, and I was hip to how good Barfield was. My dad worked with Lloyd Mosby's sister, so I was hip to Lloyd Mosby. And then you look across the diamond and you see all these players, and I'm like, hey, don't forget that outfield from, I think it was from 86 to 88. Those seasons, maybe even 85, that was an incredible, hard to beat outfield across any era. I mean, that's just 3 great players. They weren't all necessarily, George Bell was the other guy. They weren't all necessarily great the same year. Between the 3 of them, you average them out, and you've got a lot of stolen bases. Every single one of them, I think every single one won a Silver Slugger. There was a lot of Gold Gloves. It was just a lot of talent. And so you take that great NEPTA thing and it's like, hey, I can add something on top of that and be like, don't forget, this was a great outfield between 86 and 89 or whatever those years were. And other people can do the same thing. And we really can celebrate that outfield, that era of Toronto, and just really love baseball. And that's one of the things I love about what you create, man. It's a really neat way to do one of the things that I love to do, and I know you love to do it too, is just to celebrate baseball, celebrate an era, and really learn something. Because when people fight back, and I'm like, well, let me dig back into the numbers that I think I have. Let me dig back into this era. And then, I'll go into the newspaper's database and I'll look for things and I'll go read the paper at the time. And I'm like, oh shit, I didn't realize this thing was a thing. And then I'll bring those notes out too. And there's just such a neat way to participate communally instead of just having like Bob Ryan writes, no knock on Bob, but have Bob write one thing. We all read it and go, oh, okay, great. That's a great thing. And then move on to the next thing. No, we can build a bigger body of knowledge. I really love that about what you do and what you create.
Yeah, it's really organic and it's really fun and it draws in people to participate in different ways for different reasons. And it's allowed me to interact with people from fan bases all over the place. I mean, I'm from the New York area. I live in the New York area. I've pulled for the New York teams my entire life. But I have tremendous respect for the great players and histories of all the different teams. And I mean, like you were talking about that Toronto outfield, I think George Bell won an MVP.
He did.
The year before his MVP was when Jesse Barfield hit 40 bombs, led the majors. And those guys were just so dynamic, great defenders, great hitters. And I just remember feeling like they were an outfield where you saw more pictures of the three of them together than any other outfield trio. Like those were the guys. And they looked great in those 80s Blue Jays uniforms. And it's just so cool to be able to, talk about them and reminisce about them. And then to have Jesse Barfield retweeting it and commenting on it, he was saying he didn't even realize the company he kept in terms of batting runs, fielding runs, and OPS. He was really, excited to find out that, he stacks up with guys like Barry Bonds and Willie Mays on that list. And it's really, really cool, especially anytime it gets back to the player like that. I've heard from some big leaguers who either have been featured on NEPTA or who have had their teammates featured and who try to pay it forward and be like, hey, can you do a post about this guy I played with back in the day? And it really, really makes me feel warm and fuzzy to see these guys just hold each other in such high regard. Mark Grace of the Cubs is the one who said, hey, can you do NEPTA on Brandon Webb, who he was teammates with on the Diamondbacks for a year, and also Brian McRae when they played together with the Cubs. And so, I was able to do that. And then the string continued from there. I got in touch with Brian McRae. He said, this is really great. Can you do one about Kevin Appier? And, it's just, these are guys that I grew up watching and admiring. And to be able to see them say, hey, I'm really having fun with this. Let's remember some guys. There's some really great players that I played with who I think deserve more attention. Not enough people talk about them. And that's just been really, really, really cool.
Yeah. What kind of a player do you like? Like what's a Gaetti classic play? And I guess you could say Gary Gaetti maybe, but what's a kind of guy you like? Is it a balance between that offense and defense? What's your kind of player?
So my personal favorite player of all time is the crime dog, Fred McGriff. From the time that I can remember, like being a baseball fan, he played in the Eastern Division, both with the Braves and with the Rays. And so I was able to see him a fair amount on TV. And, you just see this guy, everything about him is like very quiet, very understated. He's big, but he's not like over the top. He's not in your face. He's big, but he's quiet. And he had that iconic swing with the helicopter follow through. And I just remember he made it look easy to hit the ball out to literally any part of the park. He would just hit these towering fly balls the other way that would go over the fence somehow. He would look like he got under one and it would go out to straightaway center field. There's that video of him with the Blue Jays going to the upper deck at Yankee Stadium. Like, you get him to the pull side, he's a problem. And
Yeah.
he played so many games. He didn't go on the disabled list until I think his final season in the big leagues when he was 40.
Yeah.
Before that, he was just every day in the lineup every day. He's I think top 3 all time, maybe, in games played at first base. It's probably like Eddie Murray, Crime Dog, and I don't know. I'm just guessing, so I'll fact check myself later. But I love the durability. I love the consistency. And, it was heartbreaking to me when he didn't get into the Hall of Fame on the writer's ballot, because I remember I was pulling for him ever since, the midpoint of his career. I thought he was going to get 500 homers. I thought he was going to be a shoe-in. But we talked about Baines with the work stoppages before, but, the 94 strike, McGriff was on pace for a career high 48 homers that year. And so he would have easily finished his career over 500 if they had played a full season in 94. So he was a big casualty of that, but he was also got the double whammy of being a casualty of the steroid era, where if you look, he won 2 home run titles early in his career, I think with 35 or 36 homers in that neighborhood. He continued to hit 30-something homers every year. It's just during the steroid era, that went from leading the league to not even being top 10 in the league. And so it's not that he changed, it's that everyone around him changed. And I really do feel like the writers tried to have it both ways. They wanted to punish the PED guys without rewarding the clean guys. So sure, Mark McGwire, they kept him out because he used steroids, but then Fred McGriff, they kept him out because he didn't hit like Mark McGwire. And so how do you reconcile that? And, ultimately, I'm so thrilled that he got in. And in some ways, it's more satisfying that he got in through the era committee, which had 16 of his peers vote unanimously to put him in. And I believe he's the only the second player ever to go a perfect 16 for 16 on the era committee ballot. I think Lee Smith also was the other one. But, there's something satisfying about 100% of your peers. The era committee is all Hall of Famers or executives or, people that really were around the game intimately. Not that all of the writers aren't around the game intimately, but there are writers with Hall of Fame votes who perhaps don't cover baseball anymore and have like sort of a legacy vote and may not pay very close attention anymore to the game. So being able to see the era committee vote him in was really, really nice. I just wish it had happened when he was on the ballot, 15 years ago. But between the power, the durability, the presence he had, the swing, he's always somebody that I gravitated towards and pulled for. You mentioned Gaetti too. Obviously, he's sort of, when I started this whole thing, he came to mind as the epitome of the tier of player that I sort of wanted to celebrate, because he's a guy that, by all accounts is a consensus non-Hall of Famer. And yet he's a guy that hit 360 homers. He won a World Series. He won 4 Gold Gloves. So he could hit, he could field, he could win. I've had several opportunities to talk with him, and he is one of the most baseball guys you could ever meet. Just, he knows everything there is to know about the game. And when you get between the lines, just a fierce competitor, will do anything to help his team win. If he has an 0 for 4 day at the plate, he's going to make sure he does something in the field. He's going to do whatever it takes to be a contributor. And, he's decorated, he's accomplished. And yet, like I said, probably a consensus, not Cooperstown guy. And I think that is such an interesting sweet spot. And those are the guys that I think not enough people talk about.
A peer of his at third base, another guy who no one's clamoring for to get in is Tim Wallach. Same thing, just a fuck ton of games at third base. Great player, great glove, tons of offense, and never going to get into the Hall. But damn, what a fantastic player. Also, era peer. Those guys played a lot of time. By the way, I looked it up while you were talking, and for sure, Crime Dog is number 3. Jeff Beckley, an ancient, is number 2 at first base, and right behind Fred is Mickey Vernon, another one of these guys you're like, man, he's pretty close to a Hall of Famer. And then there's a guy named Joe Judge who's on the next row down in most games played, and he played for Washington and the St. Louis Browns. St. Louis Browns were atrocious, but there's Joe, all kinds of great accolades. These are guys that we don't even talk about because they're in black and white, and they played in the 30s and the 40s, and you just don't remember them. But these are all players that we just forget about. These are damn good ball players that are all on that flat part. Maybe they're on the hook right before the curve comes down, but these are all really, really good players that if we had a bigger Hall, if we doubled the size of the Hall, these guys, some of these guys would be in it, and you'd be like, I didn't even heard of Mickey Vernon. And Mickey Vernon turns out, well, a fantastic first baseman. You want to talk about the guys who can be talked about for the best defensive first baseman ever. He has to be in the conversation as much as we don't like it because we haven't heard of him. There he is, just scooping up balls left and right. So, yeah, it's neat that we get to talk about guys like Tim Wallach and Gary Gatti, and I love it the Crime Dog is in. I wanted to ask you this about the Hall of Fame, because one of the things I'd love to see from Hall of Fame, and I'm slowly working on, first off, let me say this. I'm working on a documentary, hopefully, if we can get everything, the funding and everything continues to go forward. These things are so hard to do, so I don't want to get too braggadocious about what we're going to do, but what we're going to do is make a documentary about Felipe Alou's life. And one of the things to do with this is to say, hey, this guy had a near Hall of Fame level career. He's also like the Jackie Robinson type character of the Latin American players. There's him and Roberto Clemente. He's the first Dominican. And he really ought to be in the Hall of Fame. And let's do this before he gets to be too old, because he's basically a 90-year-old man now. And we want to celebrate these guys and get them into the Hall while we can. So instead of having these committees be ponderous and take 2 years to maybe put nobody in, like, let's get to chopping. There's a lot of guys who need to get in. A lot of these GMs that are like getting older and older. And it's like, hey, what are we going to put these managers in that have 2,000, wins? And I mean, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people that need to be considered. And so we're going to have to open up that gate. Pete thinks a little bit. And so hopefully Felipe and a bunch of other guys that we haven't got in yet, we're going to start putting them in. And I'm not politicking for anybody specifically here, but I think we're going to have to do something, because the writers are doing their job. They're being gatekeepers, but they're gatekeeping for the players. And now we have everybody else, pioneers, the early black players, haven't put any of the Japanese players that deserve to be looked. Now that we got the Negro League teams in, we got to start looking at these Japanese players that played, and then the Latin leagues. We got to start figuring all these things out. And that means we're going to have to carve open another hole in our Hall of Fame doorway and start pushing players through. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's tough because there's a lot of great baseball going on sort of all corners of the globe, and we mostly think about the impact that they make on MLB. So
Yeah.
I think Felipe Alou is an amazing example, because he's somebody that played, he's somebody that managed, he's somebody that comes from really a legendary baseball family. He's what you'd call a baseball lifer, Yeah. And I think if you ask some, average people, hey, is Felipe Alou in the Hall of Fame? Some people are going to say, yeah, I've heard that name like for decades and decades. He must be somebody pretty famous. And yeah, listen, I wouldn't be upset if Felipe Alou had a plaque in Cooperstown.
Yeah. He's the first Dominican player to come from the Dominican Republic and then get into the major leagues.
I didn't know that.
And the first thing he encounters, this is great. It's in the 50s. He goes to Louisiana, and like the week he arrives, Louisiana's like, guess what? We've decided. This is the late 50s. We've decided no blacks and no whites on the same field. He's like, well, that's great. I'm from the Caribbean. My mom's black. My mom's white. So I'm good. And they're like, no, you're black. You got to go somewhere else. And it's like, he's like, what do you mean I'm black? And all the black people are like, no, that guy's not black. We don't know what he is. He used to be Spanish. And they're like, well, we don't care. And so he instantly encounters racism. And he's like, I'm not black. And so like instantly he's like in this whole new world. And it's such a crazy story. And so he just starts cut this trail that the Latin American players had to cut. And there are other Latin American players that are there before him, but he's the first Dominican. And you look at the entire legacy, no country after the U.S. Has more players. It's just an amazing story. So, he is deserving of a big, hard, long look. And there's so many different players out there that we're going to have to consider. Who is your pet needs to get into the Hall of Fame type player?
Man, I have a lot, and I've written about them at length, and in some of them with the articles, others with the NEPTA posts. But there are a few guys that, based on a lot of context, I think just have to get in at some point. Dale Murphy is one for me. His peak was so high with the back-to-back MVPs, 5 straight Gold Gloves, I think 5 straight years playing all 162 games, 5 straight All-Star appearances, bunch of 30-homer seasons, doing all of this as a center fielder. I mean, he was one of the most decorated players of the 80s, and his peak was just, I mean, he dominated the game. And I think he's also just such a fan favorite with everybody, in part thanks to him being an awesome person, and in part thanks to Braves on TBS, which brought him to all the folks that maybe don't have a baseball team locally. I've interacted with folks on here from, Arkansas and places, that are sort of in the no man's land between big MLB cities, and they're all Braves fans because, those games were on cable. Even when the teams were bad and Murphy was the bright spot, he was the superstar that everybody latched onto. And, another thing that really has me advocating for Dale Murphy is this whole notion of the character clause, how people use it to keep players out. And they only use it as a shield to exclude. And you've never heard a writer say, I'm voting for so-and-so because the character clause mitigates in his favor. These voters are specifically tasked with considering character, integrity, and sportsmanship. And Dale Murphy is a guy of the highest quality as a person, highest character. His integrity is not in question. Didn't take PEDs. Just one of these 100% good dudes. And I really think that the character clause should cut both ways. If you're going to vote against people for betting on baseball or, taking PEDs or anything else, or being mean to reporters or, other off the field issues, it should cut both ways. And if you're going to use the character clause to keep out the guy with the greatest numbers of all time, why can't you use it to give a tiny bump to the guy with like really good numbers? You're not really asking for a lot. So Dale Murphy is one. And then the others that sort of immediately come to mind for me are, I think the great Yankee dynasty of the late 90s is woefully underrepresented in the Hall of Fame. There's Jeter and Rivera, and that's it. I think Bernie Williams deserves a look, and I think Jorge Posada really deserves a look and a plaque. Because we just have to reframe the way we think about catcher offense. Yeah. Nobody fully appreciates the offense that he provided. He gets a lot of the same rap that Jeter does about defensive metrics, and he's a butcher behind the plate, and he's bad at framing. And I mean, look, the guy caught probably 5 days a week, every week, and worked his way to winning 5 World Series rings. You don't do that with a bad catcher, a bad shortstop, and a bad center fielder, period, full stop. The other thing is he is 9th all time in homers by a catcher, 275 bombs. 9th all time. No catcher has ever hit 500. Only Mike Piazza has ever hit 400. And then so guys that are, 2 through 10 on the catcher list are all in the high 200s and 300s. And so he also had an 848 OPS. You know how many catchers in MLB history have at least, 275 homers and an 840 OPS? It's 2 guys. It's Mike Piazza and Jorge Posada. That's it.
Right.
Yeah. And so when you see how he stacks up to other offensive catchers, right? It's not Johnny Bench. It's not Pudge Rodriguez. It's not Gary Carter. It's not these guys that are inarguable Hall of Famers. On purely the hitting side, OPS and homers, it's Piazza and Posada. They played in the same city at the same time. It'd be really cool to see them both wind up in Cooperstown. And, I just think a team that wins 4 World Series in 5 years, 6 pennants in 8 years, probably got there by having more than 2 Hall of Famers on the roster.
Yeah, I remember the era too. They would say there's no Hall of Famers in this team, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Derek Jeter is obviously going to be a Hall of Famer. Even in the '90s, you could see that was going to happen. And I'd throw David Cone, David Wells, and Roger Clemens in the Hall of Fame too. That's just me. That I think we've been overly hard on the modern pitchers that have retired and not made the cut. There's a lot of great pitchers out there that we put a different standard on them than probably should have been applied. So I'm with you on that. I think we definitely need to look at that, or just do a team induction. The 1998 Yankees are inducted in. The 76 and 75 Reds are in, or whatever, something like that. Is there anything you want to ask me before we wrap this thing up? I don't want to take any more of your time, but is there anything else you want to ask?
No, I mean, I just really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk ball. I know it's been overdue, and fundamentally, I'm really into like the storytelling aspect of the game, right? There's people that want to make it very clinical, want to make it very spreadsheet based, want to talk about the numbers and the data. I love the numbers, but to me, it's about the people, it's about the characters, it's about the history. And, I'm always down to talk about these guys and, hopefully give people just a different way to think about these folks and the impact that they've made on not just on the game, but on fans of the game.
No, I can appreciate that. And I thank you for coming on and looking forward to whatever you write next. And hopefully I can get these couple things that I'm writing off my desk and over to the big webs, and so folks can enjoy it. Everybody can just go to it's real simple. Just type in Not Gaetti on X and you'll find where he's at. If not, look at my stuff and you'll quickly see, because I'm always interacting with Not Gaetti. I think the world of your work, man. I really appreciate you coming on. I know this isn't exactly your favorite thing to do, but I just think that it's great what's going on, and hopefully Elon Musk will get his robot fixed, and they'll get you even more linked up with greatness, because you're going in great directions, man. I really appreciate you. Anything else in closing before I wrap this thing up?
If you're interested in the longer form articles, you can head over to my profile on X and click on the articles tab. All of my longer articles live there. Otherwise, I'll be posting periodically. It's something I love to do, and I appreciate everybody being there for it.
Yeah, let me do that. Try to get that to go up there. Okay, everybody, follow him on X, and I'll be right back to you. Not Gaetti. I'll talk to you in a second. Everybody else, bye-bye. Have a good night.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much